You know that scene at the beginning of Saving Private Ryan where the Americans land on Omaha Beach and the first wave just starts getting mowed down by MG-42s and artillery? We've got dudes picking their arms and legs up off the sand. We've got dudes shell-shocked out of their minds. Dudes screaming, "Mama!" as they breathe their last breaths. Well, that is pretty much this battle in a nutshell. A fireworks display that goes so comically wrong, so insanely, ridiculously out of control, that it beggars belief. I mean, you've seen Dwarf or Skaven matches before. Saw one just last week, but there's a good chance you've never seen one quite like this. XMT Slade is leading the charge for the Ratmen. Normally a Greenskins guy, but he has vermin fever today, and the only prescription is more Warpstone. An entire army of Skaven weapon teams. No meat shields, no slaves, just pure, unadulterated war criminality. Something tells me Trench Craventail did not read up on the Geneva Conventions before this one, because it's gas, gas, gas with gold chevron Deathglow bombardiers. Why would you do that, you ask? Well, for the memes, really. It does increase their reload skill, accuracy, and leadership, which means they'll sit in the pocket and do more with the time that's given to them. So their game plan is to give the Dawi some epic purple nurples and bathe them in periwinkle mustard gas. But the other part of this is that DACA line. A bunch of rattling guns which suppress enemies and have much higher DPS than Warplock Jezzails. Combine that with the Teeth Breakers and their concealment bombs, and you've got one dumbass army. It's entirely weapon teams. You don't see this ever. But perhaps there is a method to all this madness. Tretch is their leader because Tretch is cheap, Tretch is memes, and there's a Plague Priest with Vermintide and Plague Monk summons, which is really the only standard thing about this build. Now across the way, for the Dawi, we're looking at what I would consider a pretty tall army composition. Ironbreakers, Thunderers, Hammerers, Slayers, maybe a bit more elite than you'll typically see against a Skaven, but nothing mind-numbingly stupid here. In fact, Thanes are reasonably common because you can get them uber cheap and use them alongside Gromby or Ungrim to help outduel Snicketch or some of the more commonly picked lords. Now, I do not recommend bringing all three runes with Rune Lords or Rune Smiths, generally speaking. That used to be meta. It's not anymore. Usually you just don't get good value from two of those runes, so usually you just stick with Rune of Wrath and Ruin. The only way to get good value out of them is if you blob up, which you don't want to do against Skaven. And I do not recommend Hammers either, which are unfortunately just kind of a bad unit right now. Maybe only useful in a handful of matchups when you know your opponent's going heavy on the armored infantry. But Gromradol is a great choice here. He's even better now with the Twist in the Twilight. Kind of stepping on Ungrim's toes a bit now that he has Unbreakable. And Gromradol has no fear, is now an AoE ability with a melee defense boost, not map wide. But he's fantastic because he hits like a Mack truck, has his flash bomb, and is a glorious lord, bringing gifts of coal and sharp axes to all the little rat men. Floating overhead is the Skyhammer Gyro Bomber, a unit that has kind of incredible theoretical DPS, but typically sees more play in campaign because huge infantry blobs are more likely to form there. A rare case where the normal unit might be a better choice over the ROR. Gyro Bombers might be better than the Skyhammer, simply because the spread on the bombs for the Skyhammer means some of the DPS often gets wasted. But make no mistake, Gyros are a core component for the Dwarfs in this particular matchup, which is why he might be pooping his pants after seeing what the Skaven have brought to bear here. He does not have a lot of mobility with only one Gyro Bomber, and that means his elite Dawi infantry, well, they might be in for a rough time. The way you counter Skaven weapon teams is by having lots of cheap bodies to throw into the grinder and having a bunch of Fortunate Sun blasting from your Gyro Air Force overhead. Then artillery or rangers can shoot them with impunity. It's not a bad thing to have Ironbreakers against Skaven. We see Norgrimlings show up all the time, but the second you see this many gold chevron death globes, they need to be huffing and puffing their way back into the center of your formation. Gotta protect those Ironbreakers against all this purple rain. So if they're in the vanguard and they're getting exploded left, right, and center, well, you're losing a lot of value right from the start of the match. The pillboxes have opened up here for the Thagaraki. Just let the creeping barrages begin. America! Yeah. I'm not gonna say the word because it gets demonetized, and it's just Rattling Gun City. Look at all of this stuff, man. Look at all of those tracer rounds crisscrossing the battlefield, and immediately, dude, we're a minute into the game, and four full Dawi infantry units are already dead. Stop it, they're already dead. So not a great start if you're the Dwarfs. In fact, pretty much a nightmare scenario, because he has very few units that can actually put pressure on the weapon teams. Thunderers can. Corlers can, the Skyhammer can, but there are 5 Rattling Guns. That's far too many overlapping fields of fire to realistically close the gap with your infantry, especially with a build that went fairly elite. It doesn't have a whole lot in the way of meat shields. So just like Rambo or Arnold and Predator, time to bust out the trusty old M60 War Pigs and let her rip with an avalanche of Warpstone ammunition. And a few Plague Monk summons to tie up the Slayers, which is also a great engagement for the Skaven. That's just a spell essentially tying down and able to destroy an entire unit of Dwarf Slayers. One of the few units on the field that actually have the speed to potentially close the gap against Rattlings. Now the Hammerers, they're going into melee because they have to. They don't have a choice. They're committed now. That means they're in range of Death Globes and Rattling Guns, and it is just a complete and utter disaster. There's no other way to put it. It is destruction and death all along the Dawi line. Absolutely brutal start to the game, and it's all downhill from here. Is there any way back from this? No. We open at the close. Hammers trying desperately to do something. They can't. They won't. Their entire unit went from 100 to 0 real quick. Runesmith, rounded off by Rattling Guns and the Teeth Breakers. Poison Globe, or rather Death Globe Bombardiers moving in to finish off the Thunderers, and that won't take more than a handful of volleys, because they're Gold Chevron. They're firing super fast. Look at that damage, man. 2,500 evaporated in the blink of an eye. Their chances of winning are falling faster than the Globes themselves at this point, and the Dawi Bully is well and truly complete. It's just a formality at this point. Thane doing what he can alongside the Slayers of Karak Kadrin. They're dealing with the Plague Monks. They should be able to win that, but if they do, I mean, great job. You got rid of one summon. You've got all the weapon teams still to deal with, and now Grommadal is isolated, and Santa Gromby just getting turned into Swiss cheese, like Mouse in the Matrix when the agents show up, or like the Thickness in Samurai Cop. My favorite death scene in any movie ever. If you've never seen that, go watch it. It's hilarious. You just can't even right now. Can't even believe what just happened. And with that, it's pretty much Tretch finishing off a handful of Slayers while the Rattling Guns fire in. Oh my god, this is just... wow. You don't see battles like this every day. I'll just say that. And that's the price you pay when you have the wrong army for the wrong scenario. And it's not like you go into a battle expecting to see something like this. I would not say the Dwarf build was a spectacular build by any stretch of the imagination, but it would have fared a lot better against a standard Skaven army. Against all that firepower, though, it had absolutely no answer. Like I said, nothing to be ashamed about. It's something that has happened to every single person who has ever played this game in multiplayer. Sometimes an opponent's army catches you off guard and you have no answer for it whatsoever. That's just a byproduct of a game with this much diversity. Build Roulette has conquered the best of us. Now, this army from XMT Slade, by the way, 100% legal in rank. This was a ranked battle, I do believe. You can do this if you want to conquer leaderboard. Now, perhaps a little bit of inexperience in this matchup from the Dwarf side of things, so that played into it for sure. And I already know I'm going to get like 50 comments on this video talking about how trash Dawi are, how they are helpless against Skaven, how they need their rework immediately, all the standard complaints that happen anytime a faction gets their ass kicked on YouTube. If every faction in this game was as underpowered as YouTube comments would have you believe, they would all be F tier and completely unusable except for Skaven and maybe the Vampire Coast. So instead of blaming balance, which was not the problem here, let's diagnose the root problems and come up with an army composition that would be more effective against traditional Skaven type builds, but would also have the potential to succeed in a crazy one-off scenario like this one where Slade brought 10 goddamn weapon teams. Now, obviously, Slade was memeing hard in that battle. You're not going to see that kind of build particularly often, even against Dwarfs, because it's weak to something like this, which is what I would consider fairly meta or standard against your average Skaven army. Gromradal, a Thane, Felix Jaeger, not necessarily the most important things to have those. I mean, they are important. Snickich is a common pick against the Dwarfs, so having a anti-infantry, anti-lord goon squad like that can certainly help a lot. Having the regen, very useful. But seeing this dwarf army, you can see that it goes a lot wider. You're not giving your opponent a lot of expensive, high-value infantry like hammers or iron breakers to run over. Where weapon teams really thrive is when they're able to shoot into iron breakers or hammers and quickly get their value back. So whatever lord you go for, whatever heroes you go for, I think the core is having rangers or quarrelers, having a decent amount of those, so you have firepower to put pressure on the Skaven infantry and on their weapon teams, and perhaps more importantly, gyrocopters and gyro bombers. Both of those incredibly important facets of how the dwarves counter the Skaven. Brimstone guns and steam guns both have an important role to play. Steam guns, great for killing death runners with their bombs or with their regular shooting. And brimstone guns, of course, can isolate single entities, kill monsters, kill off doom flares, kill off doom wheels, those kind of things, and then do their bombing runs as well. But I mean, if he had a gyrocopter Air Force there, 3 or 4 units of those, immediately he has something that can tie down all of those weapon teams, prevent them from firing, or at the very least, soak up some damage, do some dodging. Rattling guns will miss the majority of their shots when they're flying around, and that allows his main infantry line to push up, close the gap, and get in and amongst those death globes and the rattling guns. And once they're running backwards, once they're no longer shooting, Skaven are in big trouble. Put some cannons in there to put some pressure on them as well, and you are good to go. Hope you guys enjoyed.